The dust storm came out of nowhere. One moment, the elephant herd was moving peacefully across the Mboseli Basin, 32 animals following ancient paths toward fresh grazing. The next moment, a wall of red dust swallowed everything. Visibility dropped to 0. The wind screamed so loud that even elephant calls, sounds that can travel for miles, were lost in the chaos. When the storm passed 20 minutes later, the herd regrouped. One calf was missing. Her name, given by researchers, was Nima, Swahili for grace. She was 14 months old, still nursing, still completely dependent on her mother. During the storm, she had wandered in the wrong direction, disoriented by the wind and dust. Now she stood alone in a dry riverbed, 3 kilometers from her family. Nima called for her mother. The sound was high-pitched, desperate, the cry of a baby who has never been alone before. She called again and again, turning in circles, searching for the familiar gray shapes that had surrounded her since birth. No one answered. What Nima didn't know, what she couldn't know, was that something had heard her cries. Something that wasn't her family.
Ryan Mitchell had been in Africa for 6 weeks. He was 34 years old, a freelance wildlife photographer from Colorado with shoulder-length blonde hair usually tied back in a loose knot. He had come to Mboseli on assignment for a conservation magazine, documenting the impact of drought on elephant migration patterns. Ryan wasn't a scientist, he wasn't a ranger. He was just a guy with a camera who had always felt more comfortable around animals than people. His ex-wife used to joke that he cared more about elephants than their marriage. She wasn't entirely wrong. Ryan had parked his Land Cruiser on a ridge overlooking the dry riverbed, waiting for the dust storm to clear so he could resume tracking the herd. When the air finally settled, he raised his camera to scan the landscape. That's when he saw her. A small elephant, alone, standing in the middle of the riverbed, calling, spinning, clearly lost. Ryan lowered his camera. He knew the rules. Don't interfere. Don't approach. Let nature take its course. A lost calf would either find her herd or she wouldn't. That was how the wild worked. But Ryan also saw something else through his telephone lens. Movement in the tall grass on the far side of the riverbed. A flash of tawny gold. Lions. The Mboseli lion pride had been stalking the elephant herd for 3 days. They were desperate. The drought had driven most prey animals north, and the pride, 2 adult females and 4 subadults, hadn't made a successful kill in over a week. They were starving. Adult elephants were untouchable. Even the hungriest lion wouldn't attack a full-grown elephant surrounded by her herd. But a calf? Alone? Separated from all protection? That was different. The dominant female, a scarred lioness with a notch missing from her left ear, had spotted Nima the moment the dust storm cleared. She had immediately signaled the others to move into position. Now they were spread across the riverbed in a loose semicircle, hidden in the grass, waiting for the perfect moment. Nima had no idea they were there. She was still calling for her mother, still turning in desperate circles, still believing that help was coming. Ryan watched through his camera as the lions crept closer. 200 meters, 150, 100. The subadults were getting impatient. One of them broke cover slightly, ears forward, muscles tensed. Nima finally saw them. She froze, then she screamed, a sound of pure terror that Ryan felt in his chest even from 300 meters away. The lions began to run. Ryan didn't think. He started his Land Cruiser and drove straight down the ridge, engine roaring, horn blaring, heading directly for the riverbed. The lions heard the vehicle coming. They hesitated just for a moment, confused by this loud metal beast charging toward them. That hesitation saved Nima's life. Ryan reached the riverbed and positioned his Land Cruiser between the calf and the approaching lions. He leaned on the horn, a continuous blast of sound that echoed across the basin. The lions stopped. The dominant female stared at the vehicle, at the human inside, calculating. Lions in this region knew vehicles. They knew that humans inside vehicles were not prey, but they also knew that a starving pride couldn't afford to give up an easy meal. She took a step forward. Ryan revved the engine and lurched the vehicle toward her. The lioness held her ground. For a long, terrible moment, predator and human stared at each other. Then the lioness made a decision. She turned and signaled the others with a low growl. One by one, the pride retreated into the tall grass. But they didn't leave. Ryan could see them through his camera, repositioning, circling, waiting. They weren't giving up. They were just regrouping. He looked at Nima. The calf had pressed herself against his vehicle, trembling, too terrified to move. She was using the Land Cruiser as a shield, the only protection she had in a world that suddenly wanted to kill her. Ryan turned off the engine. The silence was deafening. He was stuck. If he drove away, the lions would attack. If he stayed, he was trapped in a riverbed with a traumatized calf and a hungry pride that would eventually figure out that one human in a vehicle wasn't really a threat. He needed to find the herd. He needed to reunite Nima with her mother. And he needed to do it before the lions decided that desperation was worth the risk. Ryan made the most dangerous decision of his life. He got out of the vehicle. The moment his boots hit the ground, Nima moved toward him. She pressed against his leg, her small trunk reaching up to touch his arm, his shoulder, his face. She was shaking so hard he could feel it through his entire body. "Okay," Ryan whispered. "Okay, I've got you. But we need to move." He couldn't carry a 14-month-old elephant. She weighed over 500 pounds. But he could walk with her. He could guide her toward the ridge where he had last seen the herd moving before the storm. He could try to find her mother. Ryan started walking, one hand resting on Nima's shoulder. She stayed glued to his side, matching his pace, her trunk occasionally wrapping around his wrist as if to make sure he was still there. Behind them, the lions followed. Ryan could hear them in the grass, the soft rustle of paws, the occasional low vocalization. They were tracking him, waiting for him to make a mistake. He kept walking. The ridge was 2 kilometers away. Normally, Ryan could cover that distance in 20 minutes. But Nima was slow, still shaking, still stopping every few steps to look around for threats. And the lions were getting bolder. He saw them now, shadows in the grass, paralleling his path, getting closer with each passing minute. The sub-adults were the most aggressive, darting forward, testing his reaction, retreating only when he shouted and waved his arms. Ryan's throat was raw from yelling. His heart was pounding so hard he could hear it in his ears. And they were still a kilometer from the ridge. Then he heard something that changed everything. A sound like thunder, coming from directly ahead. The mother elephant exploded over the ridge like a gray avalanche. Her name was Amara, the same Amara that researchers have been tracking for over a decade, one of the oldest and largest females in the Amboseli population. She weighed over 5 tons. Her tusks were longer than Ryan was tall, and she was running directly at him. Ryan's entire body went cold. He had seen elephant charges before, mock charges, warning displays meant to scare off threats. But this was different. Amara's ears were pinned back against her head. Her trunk was curled under her chin. Her eyes were locked on him with an intensity that left no room for interpretation. This wasn't a warning. This was an execution. Ryan had seconds to act. Every instinct screamed at him to run. But running from an elephant was suicide. They could hit 30 miles per hour, and they never, ever stopped once they committed to a charge. He had one option. He pushed Nima away from him, gently but firmly, creating space between himself and the calf. And then he dropped to his knees. He lowered his head. He made himself as small and non-threatening as possible. And he waited to die. The ground shook beneath him. He could feel Amara's footsteps like earthquakes, getting closer, getting louder. He could hear her breathing, great huffs of air expelled with each stride. He closed his eyes. The thunder stopped. Ryan opened his eyes. Amara stood 3 feet in front of him, so close he could have reached out and touched her trunk. Her massive body blocked out the sun. Her breath washed over him, hot and heavy with the smell of grass and dust. She was staring at him, not with rage anymore, with something else.
something he couldn't identify. Then Nima cried out, a small, desperate sound, and rushed forward, pressing against her mother's leg. Amara's trunk descended. She touched her daughter first, running her trunk over Nima's face, her ears, her body, checking for injuries, confirming that this was really her calf, really alive, really safe. Then she did something that Ryan would remember for the rest of his life. She touched him. Her trunk brushed across his hair, his face, his shoulders, gently, exploratory, the same way she had just touched her daughter. Ryan didn't move, didn't breathe. Amara rumbled, a low, vibrating sound that he felt in his bones. And then she turned to face the lions.
The pride had followed Ryan's scent to the base of the ridge. When Amara charged over the crest, they had scattered, but not far. Now they regrouped in the grass, watching the mother elephant, calculating their chances. A lone elephant with a calf was still vulnerable. But Amara wasn't alone. The rest of the herd appeared on the ridge, 20, 30, 32 elephants, following their matriarch's distress calls. They poured down the slope in a gray tide, trumpeting, stamping, creating a wall of flesh and fury between the lions and the calf they had almost killed. The dominant lioness took one look at the approaching herd and made her decision. She turned and ran. The rest of the pride followed, disappearing into the grass, their hunger outweighed by the certainty of death. Ryan still knelt on the ground, surrounded by elephants. He should have been terrified. A human on foot in the middle of a herd that had every reason to see him as a threat, this was how people died. But the elephants didn't attack. They moved around him like water around a stone, close enough to touch, but never touching, accepting his presence in a way that defied everything Ryan knew about wild animals. Amara stood closest. She hadn't moved since the lions fled. She remained positioned between Ryan and the direction the pride had gone, her body a shield, her trunk occasionally reaching back to touch Nima, and sometimes, almost accidentally, to touch Ryan as well. He understood then. She hadn't been charging at him. She had been charging toward him, toward her daughter, toward the human who had kept her daughter alive long enough for rescue to arrive. And now, she was protecting them both.
Ryan stayed with the herd until sunset. He didn't have a choice. His vehicle was still in the riverbed, and walking back alone meant risking the lions that were surely still in the area. So he sat in the grass, surrounded by elephants, watching Nima nurse for the first time in hours. The calf kept looking at him. Every few minutes, she would break away from her mother and waddle over to where Ryan sat. She would touch him with her trunk, his hair, his hands, his camera bag, and make small chirping sounds. Then she would return to Amara, nurse for a while, and come back to check on him again. "I'm not going anywhere," Ryan told her each time. "I'm right here." He didn't know if she understood, but she kept coming back. As the sun began to set, Amara approached him. Ryan tensed. Even after everything, a 5-ton elephant walking directly toward him triggered something primal in his brain. But Amara didn't charge. She didn't threaten. She stood over him, blocking the fading light, and lowered her trunk to his face. She breathed him in. Ryan had read about this behavior, elephants memorizing scents, creating mental maps of individuals they encountered, but experiencing it was something else entirely. Amara's trunk moved across his skin, his hair, his clothes. She was learning him, recording him, making sure she would recognize him if they ever crossed paths again. When she finished, she rumbled again, that same low, vibrating sound from earlier. Then she turned and walked back to her daughter. The herd began to move, following ancient paths toward water and safety. Ryan watched them go, Nima's small shape visible among the gray giants, occasionally turning back to look at the human who was no longer following. At the crest of the ridge, Amara stopped. She turned and faced Ryan across the distance. For a long moment, they looked at each other, the mother elephant and the man who had saved her daughter. Then Amara raised her trunk in a gesture that Ryan had only seen elephants make toward each other. A greeting, a farewell, an acknowledgement. Ryan raised his hand in return, and then she was gone. Ryan's photographs from that day were never published. He had shot hundreds of images, the dust storm, the lost calf, the approaching lions,
the desperate walk. But when he reviewed them back at his camp, he realized something. The most important moments hadn't been captured. The feeling of Nima's trunk wrapping around his wrist. The ground shaking as Amara charged toward him. The gentleness of a mother's touch after she realized he wasn't a threat. The raised trunk on the ridge. Those moments existed only in his memory. And maybe that was where they belonged. 6 months later, Ryan returned to Amboseli. He found the herd near the same basin where the dust storm had separated Nima from her family. 32 elephants, moving peacefully across the landscape. Ryan parked his vehicle at a respectful distance and raised his camera. Through the telephoto lens, he spotted Nima immediately. She was bigger now, nearly twice the size she had been during the storm, but still staying close to her mother, still learning the ways of the herd. As Ryan watched, Amara lifted her head. She turned toward his vehicle. For a long moment, the mother elephant stared at the distant Land Cruiser, at the man behind the camera. Then she began to walk toward him. Ryan's heart hammered. Other photographers in the area had told him that Amara was unpredictable, that she sometimes charged vehicles that got too close. But she didn't charge. She walked calmly across the basin until she stood just 20 feet from his vehicle, close enough for Ryan to see the texture of her skin, the intelligence in her eyes, the small scratches on her tusks. Close enough for her to see him. Amara raised her trunk and breathed in, and Ryan knew, with a certainty that defied logic, that she remembered. She remembered his scent, his face, the day he had walked across a lion-infested plain with her daughter pressed against his side. She remembered. Nima appeared beside her mother, curious about what had captured Amara's attention. When she saw Ryan, she made a sound, a small chirp, the same sound she had made 6 months ago when she kept returning to check on him. Ryan laughed. He couldn't help it. "Hey, little one," he said softly. "Look at you, all grown up." Amara rumbled. Nima chirped again. Then, together, they turned and walked back to their herd. Ryan watched them go, his camera forgotten in his lap. He thought about the moment he had decided to drive into that riverbed, the moment he had gotten out of his vehicle, the moment he had dropped to his knees in front of a charging elephant, trusting that she would understand. He thought about all the rules he had broken, all the risks he had taken, and he thought about a raised trunk on a ridge, silhouetted against the setting sun. Some moments couldn't be photographed. Some moments could only be lived. And some bonds, forged in dust and terror and desperate hope, lasted longer than anyone could explain.